Marathwada Mitramandal's College of Architecture is located in the heart of Pune city. Founder by President late Mr. Shankarabji Chavan and affectionately raised by the late Mr. Vilasravji Deshmukh. The MMM group is led by noble trustees and guided by highly qualified and experienced faculty members. The campus has ample parking space, sophisticated infrastructure which includes ICT-enabled classrooms, studios, seminar halls, conference room, computer lab with state-of-art software and facilities for the physically challenged people.
Well-maintained and updated library which is well equipped with textbooks, reference book.
Our alumni is placed worldwide and many students settled abroad.
Elections for Students' Council is conducted every year using online voting system.
Good afternoon and welcome all the attendees and panelists to day 6 of the webinar series 8 Days, 8 Architects, 8 Cities. I, Architect Tanay Ambone, on behalf of Marathwada Mitra Mandal College of Architecture, Pune, would like to welcome our panelist, Dr. Supriya Nene, Principal at MMCA, Architect Girish Doshi, Design Chair at MMCA, and our speaker for today, Architect Uday Andhare from Ahmedabad, India. Thank you, sir, for joining us today. I will take this opportunity to introduce our speaker for today. Architect Uday Andhare is design principal and co-founder of Indigo Architects Ahmedabad since 1998. He steers the studio emphasizing a process-intensive, technically appropriate and ecologically sensitive approach that weaves together threads of traditional wisdom into design. Strategies for thermal comfort, seeking clues from vernacular traditions have become cornerstones of the practice. The firm believes that architectural expression rooted in these sensibilities can define a language that belongs to its time and place. Some of their noted projects include the Living and Learning Design Center Museum, the Ajrak Printing Studio in Ajrakpur, and the Natrani Amphitheatre in Ahmedabad. Welcome, sir. I would like to request Uday sir to kindly start with his presentation.
Hello, good evening, everyone. And thank you, Girish Doshi, MMCOA, and Tanay for this initiative and the invite for us to come and share our work and our thoughts today. These are difficult times for all of us. In small or big measure, prompting us to reflect upon our recent past and ways of engaging with our surroundings and focusing pretty much on the essentials. Learning and exposure plays an important role in our formative years as professionals and continues over the course of a lifetime. Its components are slowly distilled from a process of adding value and meaning to the journey that defines a trajectory. In my view, its reinvestigation and relevance ought not to be mandated just by a calamity such as the one we face today. Our journey from being students of architecture to becoming part of this larger fraternity made evident to us that history and precedent in shaping habitat were fraught with paradoxes, and negotiating these a continuing process. We have seen that calamities, both natural and man-made, evoke knee-jerk reactions that are largely opportunistic and result in an adverse transformation of the cultural and the physical landscapes. In our domain of work, inclusion of intensive labor and craft practices to employ more people using relevant material choices that are local and sustainable is more imperative than before. Design must address resilience, economy of resource, and thermal comfort as its underpinning. It calls for a reimagination of spatial dimensions that foster a social connect beyond the virtual and must afford an engagement of public and personal spaces with nature as a medium to heal. We were part of Learning at CEPT, studying architecture, that set valid directions emphasizing a critical review of modernism, vernacular traditions, and an understanding of formal Indian architecture that fostered interpretation. It equipped an entire generation of practitioners and students to define directions that are diverse yet meaningful. Our teachers, I mean those who taught us as well as what taught us, continue to be our source of inspiration and a shared camaraderie even today. What we have seen and admired about their work was the quality of non performance, whether it was teaching or building. We were influenced deeply by their reticent, silent works that happened around us and spoke of processes and struggles and small, sure achievements as well as their failures. For us, it was a honing, not merely intellectual, but embodied the phenomenological aspects of architecture anchored in its sensorial dimension. It dawned on, it dawned on us early that there is a difference between sense, vision, and image. Rigor of thought was always paired with the process of acting upon an idea. It was not important as much to arrive at a solution at the outset, but the journey which defined the imminent outcome. The lag between process and outcome was cherished. The outcome celebrated, while at the same time relegated to a process or relegated to a work in progress, a never ending continuum. Academic interactions through evolving teaching methods over the years and the influence of students and peers continue to contribute to thought. I deeply admire the work of fellow architects and engineers today who passionately engage with new alternatives using earth, innovative masonry techniques, use of bamboo, and even efficient systems that explore the potential of steel, developing an amazing body of shared open knowledge. Ahmedabad has been a fertile ground for interdisciplinary engagements fostered by a city. Its many institutions, where musicians, bards, storytellers, scientists, engineers, artists, historians, sculptors, and many trespassers shared a common stage. The amalgam was essential and helped our abilities to make lateral connections across disciplines, enriching the process of infinite learning. There are several other experiences that have informed our life and work and its hopeful balance. Parallel interests in music, food, and its traditions of cultivation, cooking, and handling, all available resources, continues to be an important learning. I sought to understand the lives of musicians like Kumar Gandharva, Bhimsen Joshi, and discovered Pandit Rajiv Taranath while I was at SET, who have shared their thoughts through many stories and documented interviews. Their quest to find their own sound or meaning in their craft, cutting out chatter, as Pandit Taranath puts it, in order to discover freedom through their own musicality, is deeply inspiring. Mansanabu Fukuoka's book, One Straw Revolution, talks of the concept of minimally invasive farming methods that opened our eyes to new dimensions of engagement. Anupam Mishra and his seminal works, Aaj Bhi Khare Hain Talab and Rajasthan Ki Rajat Boonde, continue to guide and reinforce our faith in water and its relevance to what we attempt to do today. He talked of the idea of Aadhar, Samaj, and Samaj, meaning support systems, deep understanding, and society, which remains a vital learning. The works and writings of his proteges in the field is an inspiring story even today. A deeper knowledge of water and its structures could not be understood without the understanding of context, society, materiality, and the craft of building. The idea of conservation of water through its ingenious methods seen in kunds, valves, cisterns, and wells was essential. Our interest in the study of stone and lime in construction exposed us to live practices of using lime in contemporary construction for its incredible resilience, affordability, and thermal comfort. What I've been showing you in a series are examples from the Thar Desert, examples of lakes that have remained perennial in conditions which have been very harsh and with great scarcity of water, which help us orient our understanding to some of the deeper practices that are prevalent and what they mean today. A lot of our work has also been through travels and understanding and documenting the things that we see through sketches and through some of the mechanisms by which these things become possible. Of course, looking at architecture by drawing is a very, very important tool, which a lot of the previous speakers on this forum have emphasized, and I cannot stress the importance of that further. The discovery of new forms that connect with water and are related to water and become water-centric in their making is a very, very important lesson for us as architects. Of course, there are known examples of formal architecture connected with water and their integration into the urban fabric as we see today, which is also extremely important. As if by providence, we met several masters. This photograph is Master Lime Mason Nizamuddin ji from Bikaner, who was instrumental in educating us along with our masons to realize our first few projects in lime done in Ahmedabad and later in Kutch. Subsequent travels to the lime-rich zones of Nagaur and Shekhawati gave us first-hand exposure to the nuances of the use of this material. Its breathability makes it a living membrane that connects the structure with the natural order of exchange, enhancing the quality of the environment within, self-healing the surface, and ensuring durability. Its forgiving nature during construction is a virtue that affords time to be creative. We have visited several structures. This one is a very remote fort in the northwestern corner of Rajasthan in Tanote area, which we discovered is a very beautiful fortress built entirely out of lime, bricks, and sand. And it's about 250 years old. Small privately owned lime quarries and kilns that have survived the onslaught of cement companies continue to provide an alternative to the locals over cement. The practices of hot lime mortar and plaster being used today are an absolute delight, and we have been able to tap into these resources directly to support the use of lime that we do in cities. Recycled surkhi and lime bricks coupled with hot lime mortars and plasters have proved to be an excellent combination for load-bearing and confined masonry systems that we deploy at various scales of building. Skilled craftspersons are employed on projects to train teams of local masons who have never worked with lime before to a great success. A big part of our role has also been to facilitate this exchange, marrying appropriate materials and construction techniques with the available practices around us. Vernacular traditions embed best practices to use minimal resources to build. We have learned from local plaster masons and well makers like Kalubai Sosa from Lok Mitra Sanstha in Saurashtra and Jayantibai Prajapati in Ahmedabad, who build very economical cylindrical masonry tanks for local farmers. These methods have been mainstreamed into our work with critical engineering inputs from us to develop a model for structure cooling and rainwater consumption simultaneously. These are some of the examples from the projects that we've completed, where a team of masons comes along with 2 or 3 helpers, and we engage our team of masons to transfer that knowledge, and with an intent that this knowledge will grow and become accessible to everybody. The whole challenge and the deterrent against people building harvesting tanks is the cost per liter, which was, set up by the plastic tank, Syntex and other companies, plastic tanks being priced by the liter and affecting the whole market about the cost. But these are very economical to build. And the 4 examples you see on the screen are the first one in Suramya House is the one we built in our own home. The second one is in Adipur House, which uses the idea of radiant cooling and creating the tank as a thermal mass. The one on the right is the Natrani Amphitheater stage, which actually holds a 1 lakh liter tank below its performance stage. And the one in the center is a very complex structure that we are working on currently for an Upashraya, which uses a stored system 2 levels below the basement and an access draw well, and the entire structure is built out of hydraulic lime and brick. This is a project which is still being worked upon, but these are drawings, detailed drawings that were made to understand what we try to achieve. Objects of joy and beauty, such as the traditional agri implements, are a great source to understand dependencies. We discovered this pitchfork called Jai in Rajasthani, which is a simple locally made timber pitchfork made in a village called Butati near Nagaur in Rajasthan. Its making involves the use of care wood twigs, cut and bent by heat shaping it to a curvature and assembled. It uses animal skin parchment and gut to hold its fork to a staff. Twig harvesters, carpenters, and leather craftsmen work together to make this lovely object of enduring beauty and utility. The object travels from one space in the village to the other, from the carpenter's yard to the leather worker's home, and back and forth until it is finished. The finished tool comes back to where it started and is sold from there. This experience is the kind of learning that makes us feel enriched and at the same time weak in the knees. Its making embodies synergistic dependence and within crafts and communities, which we are losing very rapidly and which we must seek to imbibe in our work. We discover these amazing examples of how a fan mesh of a pedestal fan is integrated into a mud wall to create this beautiful fenestration for ventilation. And then you discover these kind of examples where a thick wall has a little flue in the middle to effect ventilation within a space using used bottles. I can't help but think of what Aravena said, where he puts it beautifully. Scarcity of resources becomes a filter to arbitrariness in design, which strikes a universal chord with all of us. We often cook by the roadside, and we encounter people like the one you're seeing on your screen. He's a 93-year-old potter. This was outside Pondicherry, making these beautiful pots. And we travel, we buy and use what we find, and we buy pots, vegetables, spices in the process, encounter places and people who are warm, humane, and willing to share their world with you. So this is a glimpse of some of the things we do when we are traveling on vacation, only to increase our contact surface area of experience with what is around us and stuff that we are not generally accustomed to reaching out for. The everyday is important to us. This is the photograph, this is the plan of our studio. That's the lower level and this is the upper level. And we sit right on the edge of Shilaj Lake. This was built in 2010 and it engages our building and its sense with the temple plinth, and creates an introverted environment, which actually ended up being our lab along with our home. This building embodies all our experiments in lime and structure cooling, along with support from several people to understand the journey that we have undertaken to go on. So this is how it sits and creates this facade with the temple in the front. And this is the space from within. There are timber louvers, there is glass, there is thick screen, and there is a sort of attempted delay for the heat to come in and creating a fairly comfortable environment to live and sit and work. These are some shots of the inside, which create a sort of a stack at the ventilation for the ventilation within the space, and a certain porosity of work space and experience within, which help us control the microclimate within the building. Our home was built on the outskirts of Western Ahmedabad soon after the earthquake in 2001. This is also an important lab for us. So in this plan, we have an L-shaped plot of land, and there is a dwelling here and another part here. This is the part which we built first, where our parents moved, and then this part was built later, and then there is a beautiful connection that happens across the court between the two units. Like I said earlier, the everyday is important. And experiments in structure cooling use for rainwater, layered screening, and natural shading strategies, along with the use of lime in construction for the first time, happened at our studio. Upcycled furniture and everything that is salvaged was incorporated in both our home and studio. These are some of the sections that explain to you the nature of the built form and its relationship with the landscape. The garden where we grow our food, make compost, harvest rainwater to drink, conserve and recycle the seeds we save and share, and the food we cook, virtually living outdoors, forms the core of many lived experiences. Edible screens, vegetable, and other vines are used to shade and transform space in summer to increase its usability. These are the things we grow within our purview of everyday life, spending almost an hour and a little more every day to ensure that there is a certain amount of food that is grown to offset the stuff that we need to buy from outside. We've worked with various strategies to elegantly bring water down from the roof so that it can be harvested. And there is a certain joy in the assemblage of things. We try to assemble these things together. They may be clumsy contraptions sometimes, but they get refined over time. And this is another tank we built. The first one we built below ground, the cylinder which I had shown, and how it gets integrated within the garden. The earth over the tank actually becomes the great insulator, keeping the water temperature inside the tank to a very comfortable 27 degrees. You allow nature to take over the building. You allow plants that will give you food to engage and come into your life so that their existence and yours becomes one and a very merged experience. And there is a lot of learning in the way we see this. We have grown various kinds of vegetables and creepers and pumpkins and brinjals and other things together with rose vines. And we've discovered that they work with a certain synergy and take care of each other. And I think that's a very beautiful way to look at domestic landscape, in a way that it becomes integrated and synergistic with what our needs are and defines the interdependencies that we have with these systems. We also have experienced heat from the roof, and these are experiments where we buy hay from the local fields, tell them to store it on our roof, and eventually, when the summer is almost coming to an end, we give this back to the person from whom this was taken, and by monsoon, the roof is clean, washed, and ready to harvest water. So this gives us a very interesting connect with the local agrarian cycles. So every time there is a crop outside that's harvested, we get the hay. The hay comes to our roof. We keep it there for 3 to 4 months, and then afterwards it goes away. So it kind of reinforces our belief that if we can afford to connect ourselves with what we are around or what is around, then I think that can be very enriching. So this is the kind of produce that comes on a daily basis. Then we figure out what to do. And most recently, during the early part of the lockdown, we were solely dependent for vegetables from our garden to gratifyingly realize that we had produced enough, not only for ourselves, but also for our immediate neighbors who thoroughly enjoyed the bounty of what we had managed. Our house is transparent, it is light, and it is connected with the outside. This is the only living space we have, and the rest is all shuttable. The inner spaces open to light, open to cross ventilation, and also to the visual sense of the outside continuously at all times. And of course, our interests end up reflecting in what we store and keep. These are various kinds of pots and pans that we've collected through our travels. And they appear when we are cooking certain kinds of dishes with certain kinds of people and respond to the scale of cooking that we engage with. Sometimes there are a lot of people, and so these come into play. And these are extremely important components of our existence. Reflecting upon the current times, we feel that our choices must be sensible to address the common larger good through shared knowledge and collaborations. The small can effectively embed big ideas. Many small ideas could join the dots to define lasting, sustained progress in the right direction, quite akin to puddles of water that collect and connect to form a lake. It is a belief that meaningful work will find those puddles. We strive to define ourselves to become one of those puddles. The everyday filters into our work and being. Issues of context, history, precedent, place, ecology, native genius, societal beliefs, frugality, and adherence to a process-intensive approach define our work method. Architecture, in our opinion, has to be situated in its context so as to act with a sense of rootedness and address its times. Time, in this view, is also context-specific. Identifying native genius and weaving its value into the design process is the trigger we seek to learn new ways to be effective. Innovation in the design processes and available knowledge, in our opinion, must seek to resolve the various paradoxes between client needs and affordability, site conditions, and programmatic requirements. We have worked mostly in Western India, dealing with its harsh, arid landscape. The range of projects has been diverse, from dwellings of various scales, schools, workshops for artisans, a museum, and more recently, a place for cultural performances in the city of Ahmedabad. During the course of our work, we have defined some broad tenets During the course of our work, we've defined some broad tenets that have shaped our practice. We generally design around 5 aspects: the client and programmatic needs, the site, available resources of material, water, thermal comfort, and building resilience. Listening keenly to clients builds a rapport to realize the objective in a fair and considered manner, to establish a dialogue with stakeholders, to raise new questions and opportunities to enrich and clarify the program. Participatory, inclusive processes of interaction irrespective of the scale of the project. This is a plan of a house we completed recently before the lockdown in a city called Adipur near Gandhidham in Kutch. And the family approached us soon after the completion of the LLDC museum in Kutch. And they happened to see the museum and experience its environment and the manner in which it was put together, and called us and asked us if the same kinds of systems, principles, materials, and ideas can be integrated, if they can be integrated in a dwelling with a limited budget. So we thought it was an interesting idea to engage with a conversation with them. And so we took upon the request to go and meet them. And we encountered a very interesting, so this house basically started with that as the backdrop. So this is a plan for a family. It's a joint family. They are farmers. They are connected with the dairy business and extremely enthusiastic and aware of what the environmental ramifications are of building in a certain way. Adipur has seen some really terrible works happening post-earthquake, and along with some good ones as well. But there is a certain discordant note that the buildings around there strike, whether it concerns earthquake resilience, climate. There is a lot of money being spent on crazy finishes because Kandla port is actually the conduit for exports, and a lot of people are aware of what the West is using, and they grab all the things that are going out of the country as being appropriate and begin using those in the houses around. So they attempt to sort of make a house in line. The clients wanted a house in line, and so we agreed and we engaged in this fantastic dialogue with them to realize the plan. And this was the nature of engagement that happened on a almost on a fortnightly basis. The entire family was involved in the discussions, the plan, their own requirements, and we found a very interesting voice amongst the women of the family who took the lead in determining what is appropriate, what is not, what falls within the range of their daily ambit of work. And for us, it was a great learning experience to begin to tune into this process and come up with a building which is absolutely dovetail to every nuanced requirement of the family. So here, what we experienced was a fantastic engagement across. And then when the project was getting done, there were a lot of inputs that came from them to tweak things, and those were managed within the framework of what we had proposed, looking at the use of lime, Suki bricks, lime mortar, lime plaster, and all the works that go into a normal project that we do. What was interesting in this was the manner in which the building sits in the neighborhood. A lot of buildings around plastered cement structures, and here comes this red brick structure. And during the course of the year that the construction happened, the building also ended up becoming familiar to a lot of people in the neighborhood. And a lot of people would walk in and see and understand what we're doing. And this building actually embodies every principle of thermal comfort that we know, both in the book and through our experience, whether it is the use of lime, the managing of shared service spaces that create buffers, cross ventilation, thermal draining, rainwater harvesting, using the rainwater to cool the building. And in this particular building, there was a very interesting process that we engaged with the tank makers from Saurashtra and put them in touch with a company that does radiant cooling. And we detailed out a system where the radiant cooling system and the traditional masons who make the tanks talk to each other. And we engineered a very efficient system for creating thermal comfort. Post occupancy, we've been there at the opening and then subsequently, and we find that the envisaged spaces become used in the way that they were meant to be. And we go back to our idea of how much light is enough within a building and how dark can spaces be and what is the nature of light that comes in, and cross ventilation and reflectivity using dolomite plasters within the house and how it enhances the sense of comfort within. And I think this project has been a big learning for us and also a ratification of the things that we have been trying to achieve. One of the things we did here also was that we did not buy new furniture. We went to warehouses, we collected an inventory of old furniture, repaired the furniture, and brought in things through the clients visiting the places, selecting the furniture. And the whole house was basically managed. All the interior furniture of the house was managed in this manner, which I think is a fantastic way to start looking at all the warehouses around your cities, which are basically collection grounds for all the trash that people don't want, and try and use that back in a manner that is sensible. So this is a diagram that explains the system of harvesting water where the water is taken up, but these are the radiant pipes, and then there is this bulb of water that supplies it. This image shows the manner in which it is laid on top of the roof slabs before the final finishing is done. There is a sensitive system installed, which is not very expensive, that monitors the inflow and outflow of temperature so that the inside temperature is maintained at a very, very simple human comfort level on its own. So I come back to the physical aspects of building and construction, where we try to keep the building from heating up, so the need to cool the interior is minimized. We use materials that don't heat up and are durable, such as lime in masonry, mortars, and plasters, and devise systems that drain the heat from the roof and other surfaces. Here, I would like to talk about two things here. One, that we've always learned since we were students that it is important to insulate. But insulation is a delay mechanism, and it does not actively exit the building of its heat or get rid of the building of the heat from the building actively. So one of the things that we learned from a very senior engineer in India, Surendra Shah, who has worked on several of our projects and guided us, was the need to keep the structure cool. So this has become a very important consideration in the design process. And these are cornerstones because there is no way we can escape these. And there is no way that we can continue to afford to make buildings the way we do. So given the situation that contemporary practice happens to engage itself, these systems to us are absolutely essential. So draining the heat from the roof and other surfaces. And the other interesting thing was to use nighttime cool air to pass through the building and dissipate the heat during the day. So having worked in the desert, we realized that the nighttime cool air, the temperature drops drastically at night. And if you suck that air in and run it through within the spaces, then you end up with a very comfortable environment by morning. And this device is now become integral to the way we manage the massing and the sections and the airflow within the building. The other point is harvesting rainwater to satisfy drinking water needs throughout the year and use the stored water to circulate within the building to create a thermal mass for structure cooling. Building elements such as fenestrations, shading devices, and strategies to shield from heat gain define the other expressive layers. By that, I mean that if we have these tools at our disposal and we have certain abilities to put together a building, then that marriage is going to result in a certain freedom that you get to express certain things or not express certain things. And so our struggle really is to see what we can bring to the visage of a building, which is meaningful, not slapped on because there is no reason, but then you find the reason why it should be there. And I think that to us is the most exciting part about working. By this list, I don't mean that it's a laundry list of strategies and a must do kind of a list, but it's more like a checklist of possibilities that every project and context can afford and must be examined in order to engage meaningfully. I will now share vignettes of three projects, two projects from this point, the Ajrak Studio and the Natani Theatre, quickly. So the Ajrak Studio is right next to the LLDC museum. This is Ajrakpur village, which was formed soon after the earthquake. And this site was part of open barren land where the LLDC eventually came about. So after we finished the LLDC project, the master craftsperson Ismail Bhai Khatri, Dr. Ismail Khatri, wanted a small studio space for himself to work on. And we started working with his program and certain basic ideas of what an insert in this kind of a neighborhood would mean, and why the main master craftsman of the community wishing to have a studio of his own would mean to the rest of the community. So there were these questions that emerged. We had a fantastic dialogue with him. And then there were certain components to his requirement on a corner plot right next to his house. Was a small outlet store, a place where he could orient the visitors to the craft through videos, and a small office for himself, a process courtyard, and the printing studio, a small print shop here. And all of this here, number 9, 8, and 7, forms part of the dyeing and processing yard that he wanted. So we took this simple requirement and began looking at craft, its spatial configuration, the need for porosity so that there is an exchange between the two volumes and the workspaces. Thermal comfort was essential because we're in Kutch and this is in a very, very harsh environment. And in that, of course, our selfish motive of seeking expression and identifying place. And I think this project also taught us a lot of things where, again, the client desperately wanted us to use the things that happened in LLDC because they had seen the advantages of that. And here, at a very small scale, all the materiality, all the principles that I discussed about the previous project were done here. In fact, this project was completed 3 years back, and a lot of the clients who gave us the Adipur house to do kept visiting this place over the summer to understand how the structure cooling works, whether the floor is actually cool or not during the summer. And once they were satisfied, did they ask us to move forward. So there was a certain test that this building has also gone through. Here we have this is the west and this is the east. We are looking north in section, and there is a strong airflow that continues through the structure. There is a trellis that becomes the shading device. There are operable ventilators here which allow the heat to exit out, and similarly on the other side. And this project basically embodies every little known ability of ours in the book that we have. So that's one of the completed images taken a few months back, where the manner in which it sits. We are currently working on the extension of this and the residence for Dr. Ismail Khatri in this space, almost preempting that this would eventually happen. So the wall and the gate is in place. The neem tree is in place, and we are going to be working within this area soon. And this is the sense of the structure after it was completed. It's a small clip which will give you an idea of how the building sits in the context. What you see beyond is his current residence and office. And then there are these barren streets on which there are small tenements that people have built for themselves. This is the sense of space within the courtyard, where there is an indigo dye vat here. And these are the tanks where Harday wash, and then there are two tanks here which are meant for rinsing the fabric. And here you have what you have is the print shop. And this is the chula where all the material is boiled for the process. This is the space where he entertains his visitors. There are a lot of people who come from abroad, designers and students from fashion institutes and other places who want to learn the craft. And so this is the place where he engages with them, and the courtyard is the place where they hold workshops. And at the far end is the space where he sits. There is a small little store that we built adjacent to that space, which basically displays products that they sell from this outlet. So all the timber that is used here came from a warehouse in Ahmedabad which stocks old timber, and it was all the doors and windows were fabricated and prepared in Ahmedabad and shipped to the site and assembled in place. And then this basically sits in a context where at the far end you see our other intervention, which is the LLDC across the fields. And then there is this other scale of institution now, which responds to the big scale in a very different way. This is just to give you a sense of the space. So I go back to some of the details, the robustness of the details, the resilience, it's going to be handled poorly. So the whole sense of this space comes from the details in the doors and windows and some of the fenestrations, which we thoroughly enjoyed working on. And then the most interesting part of this process was the interactions that we created between the lime masons and the Ajrak craftspeople. Here is Sufyan Khatri, his son, that is Ismail Bhai. And here is the person, his name is Motilal Gomti, who... So you're trying to bring... And so, having done that, he was excited that this is possible. And so, in the print shop, he said that let me pull out all my blocks and start making a library of all the blocks that I have. It started off as a very messy process in which we discovered the behavior of indigo on lime, on dolomite plaster, and other such materials that they use in printing. But what we learned in the process was the synergy that exists between the building crafts and the chemistry that is uh, deployed in Ajrak printing. And I think that was a very enriching experience for us in the process. And what you see on the left is the manner in which certain mineral pigments were experimented with line to create a certain sense of place and interest within the structure. The last project which I would talk about today is the Natrani Amphitheatre, which we finished in 2018 and was part of a fantastic journey with engaging with a piece of land laden with history. So I'm sorry, I'm out of electricity, but it should be okay. So this site is on the edge of the Sabarmati riverfront. This entire precinct that you see here is the home of the Sarabhai family. This is the building Chidambaram, built by Gira Sarabhai way back. And over here, so this is the family home. And over here is the Darpana Academy for Performing Arts, whose early buildings were built way back in 1963. The earliest building that was built there was a small library that sat on the edge of the river. And this was initiated by Mrinalini Sarabhai. And the library also worked like a multi-purpose hall where dance could be taught and there were certain resources. In 1966, they purchased a temple and put a temple structure. It's like an old Haveli temple, which came up here. And later, Achyut Kanvinde, who was involved with the PRL and also very close to Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, was called in to design the Darpada Academy for Performing Arts. And his intervention here straddled the space between Doshi's library and the temple and occupied the space here. Subsequently, Kethi Shah, architect from Ahmedabad, engaged by Malika Sarabhai, was asked to develop the amphitheater, which is shown here, which sat along the contour going down to the water. So these were incremental growths that happened over time. And by 1999, the Natrani Cafe came into existence, which defined the edge along the city side. So this is the river side, and that is the city side, the structures. In 2017, the riverfront by then had engulfed and taken away a huge chunk of their property in the expansion of the riverfront. And in order to mitigate that, 2 blocks of buildings that you see here in 2016 and 17 were proposed by HCP as retaining walls that would house the Mrinalini Sarabhai and Dr. Vikram Sarabhai galleries that actually become retaining structures along the river and at the same time end up holding the land. So these became the new edges of this verdant landscape down towards the river. So this part is extremely hard. During that time, Abhikram, Nimish Bhai Patel was, who was close to Malika Ben, was also instrumental in designing the acoustic wall, which was supposed to mitigate the harsh effects of the new traffic that would move around over here. So at that time, there was also a project that was initiated, which was the Darpana studios, which involved new dance schools, a film studio, and archives. And we were actually working on this project, which was to come here. During that process, we were asked to make a proposal for the new Natrani Theatre. And while we were asking questions about how one would intervene here and the proximity of the Kanvinde building right there, our studies actually were instrumental in also making all of us become aware of what would happen here eventually when the expansion happens. So with that backdrop, this is the moment when we entered the project and looked at what was going on. And then this wall was kind of under construction at that time. And this wall was meant to rise up and block the entire connection with the river in order to cut out sound. And it was a massive wall. It was about 1.5 meters thick and almost about 13 to 14 meters tall, and ran about 30 meters. So there was, and there were a lot of experiments being done about what the wall should be, how its acoustics would enhance the space. And so at the end of the day, all of these, while these experiments were going on, we were also looking at the container that was holding the steps. And these steps were actually built on an earthen mound with Kota stone on top, and served as a fantastic outdoor venue for the people of Ahmedabad to enjoy crafts and the craft of dance, music, and interactions with intellectuals. And it was a fantastic fertile ground for all kinds of activities. This is where you see the profile of the building by Doshi, which was part integrated with the retaining structure. And unfortunately, this building was in a very, very poor state of repair. And after great attempts to look at what can be done with it, the clients decided that there were a lot of issues with the adjacent structures, and that their programmatic requirement to expand meant that we had to sensitively look at what would stay and what would not. And in that process, the old wall, which was defining the dance school, which was built in 1994, had to go because it had serious cracks. And there was a lot of water seeping into the steps, which was deteriorating the structure beneath the library. So it was decided that we have to remove all this in order to accommodate the new program. But one of the things that we suggested and we told and involved the clients with was that we would recycle the rubble. We would take all the old bricks, pulverize them, and make new Surkhi and lime bricks, and use all of this material by grinding it in with lime and sand and other additives to facilitate everything from the foundations all the way ground up. So that became a fantastic exercise to salvage everything that came out from the old structures, including the known structures that were around, including the steps. And we started to work along those lines. During that time, we also proposed to them that since we have an open amphitheater, which is going to get a lot of rain, we suggested that we open up the stage and create a huge harvesting tank under the stage so that we can create a massive water reservoir. The fundamental idea was that if you have a water reservoir beneath the stage, then you can use that water as a thermal mass to cool the structure. So the idea of structure cooling got integrated into the design at the outset. And we started working with the tank that I showed you earlier in one of the images. At that time, the wall had been completed, but its integration with the larger idea was still not in place. So we took that opportunity to start connecting all the structures that were our neighbors into the fold and the design ideas of the new structure. So to your right, you see these, the manner in which the tank was. Hello?
Yes, sir. We can hear you.
Yeah, are you able to hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, we had a power outage.
Yes.
Just trying to get my act together.
Okay.
Just a second. Are you able to see the screen?
Not yet.
Okay, hold on. Are you able to see it now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I'll just continue. So after the process started, we engaged with the whole idea of how to use the topography and the lay of the land and the structures around that created the container to scoop in the new theater. And the new theater involved increased capacity to almost double than what it earlier was. It's about 385 to sit on open tiers, and the acoustic wall on one side and the compound wall on the other. And the most important sensitive aspect was the Kanvinde building right next to the structure. The building for the library, which existed somewhere here, had to make way for a new plaza, which opened up the place for people to congregate. So the gesture was basically a circular wall, which basically tucked itself into the mound and then created this simple separating structure between what was existing, which is the Kanvinde designed dance academy and its dance floor, and the plaza as the in-between. The other very important configuration that emerged was the relationship between the ending of the wall, the wall at time, which we ended up plastering with lime, and number 10, which was the existing gallery and its access out towards the river. So these are some of the ideas and strategies that were deployed, where there's a tank, the container of the wall, merging it in section with the galleries and creating the services, and at the same time holding the whole ensemble of the theater together. One of the challenging aspects of this theater was the making of the catwalk, which is basically a suspended structure that hangs over the seating system, and the ability for anyone to access that from above without performance. So you will see slides. So this is the entrance of the river. To your left is the Kanvinde building, and there's the which approaches the space. Out there is the Kanvinde structure. This is the ensemble, the wall with the cantilever, blending the two materials, yet keeping them distinct. So this is from where you see the public access down to the river, to the riverfront, the wall, and the enclosure. This project was very, very difficult to handle for 2 or 3 reasons. One, that move to do something, have to examine against what was existing, and what was existing was very precarious. So when we were looking at this building here, which is one of the most beautiful by Kanvinde, and to intervene right next to it was a daunting task, but it was also made simple by the fact that there were 2 materials being used. And while we were not, at all being trying to reverential about it, there was a certain architectural possibility of the sense of what would happen if a wall curved right in front of it. And so there was a sort of a dialogue that we were trying to establish between the in-betweens that were created and the gesture itself. So materiality, sense of space, purpose, the physics of the place, the thermal comfort, and that I would talk about in a bit, of this structure were all the driving factors to evolve this gesture. And this is what it emerges. So you have this sweep of a wall which opens up at the dance school, opens up for public entries at 2 is located, from where projections and sound can handle on axis with the stage. What you see here is the seat of the walk, which is held together by this cantilever, which is tied back into the structure, into the columns. And there was a fantastic exercise that happened between us and the structural engineers in trying to sort of titrate slowly what the behavior of such structure would mean. And there came a very stringent requirement of a zero vibration structure, which would mean that if there are lights performing from being used from here, the structure cannot vibrate even in a minute manner, and otherwise it would mess up the lighting. So there was a fantastic additions, alterations while the structure was under construction. Parts from here to uh, a change. There were behavior analysis happening within the studio. It was also being tested to get the sense that make out the source, and the structure, because of its the concert usually starts around 8 p.m. These things, you realize how the space livens up and becomes extremely concentrated and focused internally. These are we like to talk about material articulation and structure. So, touch each other, independent each other. That is one of the working ideas in this. And there is a fantastic space which is the backstage area, from where we worked with the whole idea of this special character that is that evolves between the tiered steps of the seating, the acoustic wall, and the gantry, which takes heavy equipment down to the there is almost a 2.5 meter
Dear attendees, actually, there's some network issue at Andhare sir's end. We are trying to get in touch with him. We'll soon be back with the lecture. Kindly hold.
Hello, I'm back again.
Yes, sir.
Can you? Yeah. Sorry about that. We had a power outage, big one here. So
No problem, sir.
sort things out. Okay, so I'm just going to go back a bit. Yeah. So I was talking about how these elements that we were working with became a sort of a playful tool for us to dabble into and engage with different things around. So we had the wall, and the wall was massive, and it was not performing any structural role other than supporting itself. So when we were designing the catwalk, we thought we should touch that wall strategically and create an accessible space on top of it so that performances and other things could go back and forth outside the wall and within. So this was one idea which allowed us to kind of come in and intersect the wall and create a system where new systems of lighting and public and personnel access during performances could be managed. The other advantage of this steel structure was also that new age performances which require alternative suspension of managing space and three-dimensionality of performances was facilitated by this kind of a gesture. And we were very fortunate that Mallika Sarabhai and her team were creating this environment where we were challenged with their new requirements each time, and how we were able to respond to it. So it was quite a challenging and painful process, but resulted in something like this, which you are seeing. Our abilities and things that we've learned, textbook examples of how one articulates materials and surfaces, structure, all of these were tested in this project. And here, the idea was to use pebblecrete, which is a very strong material to create a resilient surface, China mosaic for the steps, and simple metal structures with backs for people to rest and sit. Now, this is where the seating system actually incorporates structure cooling. And what you see here is a simple vent which pushes cool air from outside and displaces the air that exists that is within the theater. So there is a displacement system which I will talk about later. We come back to the actual relationships, how the whole mass basically guides and shapes one's movement down to the water. And the structure on the left that you see with the red plastered structure is actually the accessible toilet blocks for people to use during breaks. And to the right is the entry for guests and performers when they come from the riverfront access. So this is how the photo on the right basically holds the whole idea together in a system of retaining walls. And on the right, the retaining walls release one's visual access over the edge of the wall and far into the distance to the riverfront. The underbelly of this structure has the green rooms, which are tucked in a very comfortable space. And there was this terrific opportunity to kind of embellish the space with a lot of history. These are all embellished in all the posters of past performances by both Mrinalini and Mallika Sarabhai are displayed in this area and becomes a very useful place underneath the steps. So the photograph on the right talks about how a temporary material like metal holds on and stays to contain the space that would eventually open up to the riverfront. So this is used as a service access to bring heavy equipment, pianos, and all kinds of gadgetry that is required on the stage to access. And this is the gesture. So on the riverfront, there is this facade with these alcoves, which actually perform a certain acoustical function. But there are these metal plates that were put in by Abhikram, which actually were painted, and now they become poster walls for performances to the city, while the gate actually is a large metal pivoted gate which opens up for service related reasons. So eventually, the idea is that the institution of the city will eventually become one with its edges, quite akin to some of the institutions that we see across the river, defined by the city wall and those little meaningful punctures that have enlivened the space outside the city walls that we've enjoyed so much. And then in doing that, we occupied the top of the gallery done by HCP to define the surface above. These are their air vents and, their light ports. And so we propose that there should be a green thermal mask over this to improve their thermal efficiency. And at the same time, create a very interesting upper level foreground from where one can experience the river and the ensemble of the Natani Theatre. So this is our little intervention here. This was, and how the occupation of this wall becomes meaningful. And this is the edge defined by the Mridaladi Sarabhai and Dr. Vikram Sarabhai galleries as retaining walls. And this is the sense that one gets project from looking towards the river at night. And the last thing would be a little 1-minute clip, which I would like to share with you before I end tonight's presentation.
Hello, Uday. Can you hear me, Uday? Can you hear me?
Hold on. Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So, very delightful, very simple, lot of knowledge gained. And it is as simple as the first slides you showed of Leo Pereira House, where timelessness is captured with a very simple notion and understanding of traditional wisdom. So thank you so much for that. My first question to you is, you spent your childhood in South Mumbai, probably, and you were lucky to stay in Prince of Wales Museum's campus because your father, Dr. Andhare, was curator of painting. And also somewhere you say that you wanted to be a pilot. So what are the stories actually? How that childhood and what are the memories of that?
So, you seem to have done your homework.
Yes. I must tell you that, yeah, okay.
Thank you. Yeah, so yes, I mean, growing up in Mumbai, and that was a delightful experience as a child, especially in the environment that we lived in. The museum was like a home to us. And as a child, to visit the museum was like going into the next room of your house. So that has had a very deep effect on us as children. Also, the second question about, yeah, but more importantly, the activities at the museum, the musicians who came there. I remember that there was a centenary celebration, and Pandit Ravi Shankar and Ustad Allarakha performed in the key gallery of the museum when we were just about 8 or 9 years old. And not knowing much about music, but experiencing that in that space at that time was absolutely amazing. And while we were engaged in some playful stuff at that time, the memory remains and it kind of stays with you and defines how you would perceive things later in life.
Right.
About being a pilot, yes, the whole family, in a way, all my uncles were in the army and their sons-in-laws were either in the Navy or in the Air Force. And our vacations used to be, to Air Force Station Loegaon, and where my cousin and her husband, who flew Canberras, were posted. And those were enriching experiences. I mean, we thoroughly enjoyed being there. My brother and I, we were both into aero modeling, and we were making planes and models all the time. So using hands and imagining what you could do with your hands was also an essential part of growing up, I think.
Yes. I think even second time you were lucky. Your father became a director in Indology, Ahmedabad, almost next to CEPT campus, designed by BBD. So,
Yes,
as if
yes.
you were meant to
That's
be.
a very, yeah. So it was interesting how my father had been in touch with Ahmedabad throughout his years researching miniature paintings and Indian art. And eventually, a time came when he was offered to, curate the museum, which was eventually going to be built by Dr. B.V. Doshi. And that brought him to Ahmedabad. And we lived on the Indology campus. So it was like from the Prince of Wales Museum, you come in and you land up in the Indology campus, where there was a small residence for the director. And that's where I came after my 10th standard. And at that time, I didn't know really what Indology was, and until we started visiting it. And then the LD Museum project started, in which um, Dr. Doshi would come often to the site, and there was a lot of activity. I, my father would talk about Suresh Bhai, and he would talk about Lakshman Bhai, and all these people who were part of Sangat at that time. That such and such person had come today, and he does this. And as somebody in the 11th standard, okay, maybe they were engineers or whatever. And but the other important component, I think, was that my cousin Nikita Oak was studying in CEPT at that time. And my frequent visits to CEPT actually were because of him. And I played table tennis when I was in Mumbai. And so I got a table to play under this vault, which was right next to the Community Science Center. And so I would go and exhaust myself with my need to play table tennis while all these architecture students would hang out with us. And so that interaction was also very interesting. And in hindsight, I remember going through studios at CEPT, and that was a time when Nikita and Yatin Pandya and Aniket and Bimal and all these people were in the school at that time. And I recall those days quite fondly.
I think you studied in a school where Aniket Bhagwat's mother was the principal as a schooling in Ahmedabad, probably.
Yeah. Yes, yes, yes. And my mother
So,
also taught there. So
okay.
Aniket's mom and my mom were colleagues at work.
So, what are the remembrance of Sept? Of course, you found your wife there. Apart from that, what were
Yes,
the?
yes. So no, I think the I transferred from I was at MMCA for a year, and then that was the time when MMCA just started as a school. And within a year, I moved back to CEPT, where I actually, where my family was and my parents were. And um, getting into CEPT was a very interesting experience, a lasting one. more importantly, the education we received, the exposure, the kind of grounding we received while we were at CEP is unparalleled. I mean, and it is something that you carry with you all the time. So,
Yes.
uh, I mean, I don't know which experience to narrate to you. I'm overwhelmed with the question because if you look at, I mentioned in the early part of my talk today about what we respected and what reticence was, and how to quietly go about doing your work. And who were those people who were like these, silos of knowledge to whom you could go to and learn from. And there was um, just too much exchange happening, where the studios, our peers who were studying with us, such amazing people, and it's delightful to see so many of them coming out of school and doing such amazing work across. We still share so many things together. We share what we do. We have great respect and appreciation for each other, and I think that's very healthy for the profession.
Right. I think you love classical music because of your father's background. From beginning, during your childhood days, you were connected to music, and also
Yes.
it seems that you love to cook, and sometimes you cook better than most me. That is what one of your friend Rajesh Sagra tells me.
Yeah.
So your
Yes.
skill in
I
garden
mean,
and
yes. Yeah. So, we both Mosmi and I believe that there is we are ready to absorb anything and everything that comes our way, which is meaningful. So there was one time when Parul, when Nimish Bhai's wife, is a fantastic farmer, and she's extremely dedicated to organic farming. And earlier on, like 10, 12 years ago, she invited us to a workshop, which was being done by this person called Sarvadaman Patel in Karamsad. And we went there, and it was an eye-opening experience for us because we could understand what that means, and we could connect this back to our practice. And I think between the whole idea of minimally invasive farming methods, there's a lot to learn in architecture as to how one can, begin to reduce one's palette of work to 4 or 5 meaningful things, and then continue in the process. And I think it has also helped us be less aggressive about things. It helps you keep a certain balance. And there were amazing people like Anupam Mishra ji, whom we came in contact with through a dear friend, Farhad Contractor. And our interactions with him grew over the last 10 years until he unfortunately passed away. But there was so much learning through these people. And as I mentioned in the lecture, their proteges today who have been close to them and who have, written for them, who have been working for them on the ground, all of these continue to be our friends and sources of inspiration.
right. What I can see in
So
your house,
food,
yeah.
I think connect.
Okay.
Yeah,
So what
yeah.
I
Go on.
see,
Sorry.
yeah, what I see in your house, your office, and the way you have done Ismail Bhai Khatri's house, So somewhere there is this, very, uh, kind of a rural connect, probably the way you put your rooms, and then you talk about nature of light, you question what kind of light should enter into the house, So these are very interesting, like, you get this old furniture and, so many things which I think you incorporate, as you said that this is not a checklist or a kind of a, but somewhere you try to do that very naturally, and it is not that it is seen in the architecture, but it's always there, So, like for example, the way you do your chajas, for the window, So you have found very simple solution, So as a modernist, many a times we try not to do that, but somehow you have absorbed all those ideas, and how that whole thing started, or I mean, what were the thoughts in beginning when you started your practice,
So when we started our practice, we did this house in Alua with Himanshu Parikh was the engineer. And when we came back from the US, that was probably the first house we started working on. That was a time when the suggestion that we should work with Himanshu Parikh came from Chaya. He says, you know what, you guys need to work with this guy. And I think there was a huge lesson in that. And I really thank him for it, because here was a guy who could not take any nonsense in terms of what is presented to him uh, for a structural resolution. He came with a very set agenda about what is meaningful and why it is so. And I think the first project with him, which was a series of retaining walls on a sloping site in Alua, which was a fantastic exercise to um, evaluate and examine. It's like your first concert. You're very careful about how you're going to structure things and what you want to, where you can take the leeway, where you cannot. And that project actually defined how with two materials, brick and mortar, simple retaining walls, very little RCC, what brick can do, and what is stability, and what are its tolerances. So that kind of built a sort of a vocabulary for us over time, where working with, say, an RCC frame structure became very difficult for us, because that can allow you to do anything. It's so what is it that binds you in a certain systemic approach uh, to realize something? And that we found that there was a strong relationship between that and climate and resolution for climate. So thick walls, sometimes thin walls, where do you need thickness, where do you need thinness? All those things, questions came about. And we began to kind of explore that medium of construction over time. The projects in Kutch taught us a lot about structural stability. How do you work in a earthquake-prone environment? And then, we were introduced through those exercises into the idea of confined masonry as a fantastic system to be economical and stable through our works with Professor R.J. Shah and Mehul Shah at Ami Engineers in Ahmedabad. And, that knowledge coupled with early experience with Himanshu Bhai, and down the project, a few years later, we did a project with Professor V.R. Shah. So I think the learnings from these interactions, and all of these people have been practitioners and teachers of a very high order. And for young practitioners, it is very important to engage with um, co-consultants who have similar um, interests and similar grounding and uh, similar sense of exploration. So I think that is how the whole journey kind of has sustained us over time.
Your friend talks about your love for traveling and your sense of humor. So they say that.
Love for traveling comes from the love to drive.
Okay.
And actually, fundamentally, a problem that you cannot sit in one place doing nothing. You have to be doing something. So I think that there's both a problem and an advantage there.
Okay.
But love for travel was very important, because when we had our children, every Diwali we would get into the car and go somewhere. And vacations had to be very frugal, like everything else in life. You had to go to places, and we almost missed the places that we went to during the RSPs. That why can't you go and stay in a dharamshala? Why can't you stay in places where common people go for simple things, and then learn from that? So we've been trying to kind of do those kind of things over time, along with our children who complained and got bored and found new ways to entertain themselves on journeys. But the most important thing that sustained their interest was food. So the journey and the food, and stopping and cooking and moving on and buying things and exploring new things, buying pots and pans and spices and vegetables and other things. all kind of come together in this experience. So that's what we just thoroughly enjoy and cherish even now.
Yeah. I really loved in your presentation your love for karigars, the way both of you speak to karigars and how you incorporate them into your projects, not only as a karigar, but as a thinker and, kind of a uh, idea giver. And also the way you do this Chunanu Kam, like, so I remember, kind of Nimesh Bhai talking about Chuna, and so some kind of the kind of love for all that. I mean, of course you have mastered now the western side or kind of upper west of India, so I wish that someday you get work in Ladakh and someday you get work in Kanyakumari also. So what you will do, I would love to see that,
Yeah. We have that is something which, see, we've done one project in Goa which was quite
Okay.
interesting. It was an industrial building, and where we had to make these two sheds, and in that also we discovered that in GIDC Goa there is a water shortage. So when we calculated the amount of water we required, we had these two huge roofs, and we designed this very beautiful raised plinth with a water tank for the factory to function with stored rainwater, because it rains for almost 4 months, so you have enough. So we've been like, I think, irrespective of context, the basic fundamental tools remain the same. I know of so many sensitive practitioners in the south and up north who are incorporating sensibilities that are efficient and local, because that is where I think there is sort of uh, the essence of everything lies in discovering that, I think, irrespective of the scale of the project. If you look at the LLDC project, which stands next to Ajrak Studio is just 3,500 square feet, 3,000 square feet, while the LLDC project is more than 1 lakh square feet. And so we were able to kind of, do in musical terms, like there is this Bada Khayal and then there are these small bandishes happening. But I think there is still a lot of learning in both.
Mm. Yes. Uh,
So I think scale doesn't matter.
Yes. I think Leo Pereira, you and Surya Bhai Kakani, the kind of practices you have developed, there is a lot of learning and I think very important things you are doing. On lighter side, uh, Nikita told me that once you got some plants from Kolhapur, and on the way to airport, you somehow forgot one plant, and then they couriered it to you. You were because you were so upset that that plant is not going with you to Ahmedabad. So all this story shows how you love native land and kind of uh, sensitivity, which I can see in you. Yeah.
Yeah, it has grown over time, this passion, because I think it's very important. And we also have, like, since you mentioned Surya's wife, Jai is also a very important. Like, she loves gardening, and they have a whole lot of. And she particularly has a lot of knowledge about the behavior of plants, and in her own little way, she would share a few things here and there, and we caught on those things. And this was like 20 years back, and uh, those. I think what happens around you, the people with whom you've spent time, and all of those things assimilate slowly into a reasoning and a way of living, way of interacting. You mentioned about karigars, and I think that uh, we if we seek out what we want to seek, in trying to reinforce our thinking, our practice in a certain way, then I think there is a huge wealth out there which um, kind of becomes this interdependency, and I think that is a very respectful dependency. um, we interact with them uh, as though not just as people who are useful on a project, or you but something which is more lasting and deeper. trying to understand the nuances of things and understanding them as persons. I think through that person, you will learn a lot more than his skill as a craftsperson.
Yeah. I can see all that in Natrani, where the China mosaic and the way you put your things there, how you collect the water, So a lot of, I think, hard work goes into it. It's not simple. I can understand, but the way you spoke and you were so nice and so silent, like you don't want to sell anything, you are just into your own world, So that whole feeling was very nice. So with this, I tell Tanay to take some questions from audience. We still have 15 minutes, so we'll do that. Thank you so much.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Girish sir. Well, I have to say that it's very inspiring to to see how sustainable living that you have not just been designing as an architect, but also living on your own through your garden and through the way you're having your house designed. On this note, we have a few questions from the audience. Our first question is from an anonymous attendee. Can you please elaborate on your material selection procedure? Since your projects use local materials, also vernacular techniques, what kind of challenges do it pose in quality control, timely completion, and so on?
So, if you look at any material palette in any place where you intervene, you will find what is readily available, what is being practiced, and what is known. So that layer exists. How you handle that is the first question, which brings us back to our skill about understanding materials and how the program and the site and all those things come together. So the first thing about being sustainable is to carefully review what exists right there. And we will not, we don't force ourselves to do something because we've not worked with it before, so I want to try out something. Like we've never worked with rammed earth because a situation has not arisen for us to use that material before. But if a situation arises and that is the order of the day, then we will equip ourselves to understand how to use that material, and we will modify our processes of thinking, our known tools of working with space and material and structure to evolve something interesting. And that would be an interesting challenge. So every site, every condition, every place will present itself with these challenges. So to us, it is not a given that we must use lime. If it is extremely difficult and I have to bend backwards to make that happen, then it's unsustainable. Then we have to use something else. So in the long list of things that I talked about, few may be achievable, few may not be achievable. The moment you try to achieve something different or try to use some different ingredients, it will become expensive. So that whole, it's like, when we make pasta at home, it's an expensive proposition over varan bhat.
Right.
Because you've gone out of your normal palate, staple palate, to eat something which is exotic. The moment you go towards the exotic, you're going to pay more, and you will need the skills and the understanding to make good pasta.
Right.
Or prior experience or prior exposure. So anything out of the ordinary will require ingredients which are not available to you. And so challenge the budget, challenge the whole aesthetic, and challenge its appropriateness. That doesn't mean that you cannot do it, but there are certain evaluations that need to be done in favor of what the site, the client, and the program requires.
The other question, the second question that we have is from Shebanti Chakraborty. would like to know more in detail about the ways of trapping the cool night breeze to keep the day temperature comfortable. Could you please also describe about the advantage of metal awnings over conventional chhajja, or was it just for aesthetics?
So the first time we did the metal awning, we have been observing how in high rain areas, the chhajja plays a very important role. Goa, for example, has some beautiful awning structures, and they are there because of reason. And you have rain which almost comes horizontal with wind. And one of the common problems that modern structures face is that the 600 projection chhajja has fallen short of its performance. It's also consumptive in the sense it requires RCC, it requires plaster, it requires so many things. And so it is also a stage of construction which can be eliminated. And in the process of construction, if certain stages are eliminated, then you can actually bring the cost down. So we discovered that these awnings are something which can be attached to the building. All you need is a little RCC band embedded within the structure. This became a very economical way to look at things. And the first time we actually tried it out was in our own studio in Ahmedabad. And we examined how it does. It's on the south face. And we examined how. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah, because I thought. Yeah, so keeping the rain out, understanding how much of light you want in, and these are like very simple tools.
Okay. Uday sir has got disconnected due to network issues again. We'll just wait for him to join back. The attendees, we will start in 2 minutes. Kindly wait. Sir has some electricity issue at his end.
He says that take.
Yeah. So right now we have Uday sir on phone. Unfortunately, there is some network issue at his end. So what we'll do is we'll ask questions to him, and he'll answer it through get connected to us through his phone. Well, sir, I have a question for you from Sanjeev Joshi. How do you decide on colors? They are brilliant. Any theory behind the colors?
Sanjeev, it's about not really going for the colors, but the colors what they want. So the context that we work, particularly the line, we have discovered that there are 3 or 4 primary materials which can, tone our business. One is obviously white, the government factor, and then there is terracotta and then variations of terracotta, which can be achieved because those are all natural occurring pigments. So the yellow oxide that we found is not an oxide. It's part of occur which occurs in some of the body powder. So yellow we saw in the abrupt is actually got in layers and mixed with light, and we found some incredible results which were अगर gratified by the कारीगर ये कलर पक्का रहेगा ये कुछ नहीं जाएगा and ये उड़ने वाला कलर तो भी become difficult to the material. So the yellow, the brown and the terracotta actually come from these sources. One of the things that particularly in Student Museum, the student project we did after the earthquake, we discovered that there is a whole migration of birds that happens in the skies at night. A lot of them are bats and other migratory. They actually litter the building after the farm picture kind of thing, which is found. So we wanted to use something which is fairly sort of forgiving in the sense that buildings, really get better. They're out in the open and they will stay gathering with nature. So those prices actually come from those kinds of. And yes, in our life, the current light, the light is so sharp that you actually need tonalities that could absorb the light and not dazzle you with that. Because that's also one of the comfortable in the context and company.
Yeah. So our next question is from architect Virendra Vaklu. Thank you for sharing your very meaningful work. How does the radiant cooling work during the high humidity period, such as the monsoon, and at what temperature does the water enter the slab? What room temperature do you record during the most critical period of the year, which probably would be around May or June? is there any agency that you would implement it in Delhi?
Yeah. Um, thank you, Ved. The question is that when we first tried out structure coding, coding, that was in our studio, and we believe that if you have enough thermal mass and you circulate water judiciously using a timer, then you can prolong the advantage of the thermal flywheel effect. So we are not processing that additional cooling would be required. We are saying that as long as we can, relate and play with the thermal flywheel effect effectively using all other things, then we do not need mechanized cooling or additional cooling of the water. So that was the premise on which the Adipur house I showed you actually is working. And at that point, we also let the client know and share with them that anything additional is going to become a recurring expense. So if you want to consider which most of the retail food companies support that should have X amount of utility. So what is the threshold? And one of the things that we talk about is what is the human threshold to tolerate mistake. So it's a using gesture and the spaces are well ventilated. Then air circulation within the space can be handled. So we actually also work with people who looking to understand that okay, then in that case, then we have an air conditioner inside the room. And the answer is yes, of course, yes. You can have a window, you can have a small window, or you can have a space if you want. You can use that to dehumidify the space when you think it is unbearable. And in middle ground, actually, I work with people who have minimum resources to work on building. But at the same time, we put or orient when there is a point at which we use it. So it's like saying you can use a desert cooler or all the way to the end of May, but after May you cannot use a desert cooler. And we come to an understanding for that this is going to help you so March, April, and May. And so on, and the house that will ventilate. So we are also examining the whole notion of what is called dry in our context and how to design spaces which can handle humidity air circulation as though it was in a hot humid environment. And in fact, our observation about Andamán has been that with all the water bodies around and all the canals full of water and the river, Sabarmati and all that high water all the time, the microclimate has shifted to a very uncomfortable humid environment in some of the warm months. So it's like, that's basically to answer your question. And we have worked with, Surendra in Bombay, who has been doing a lot of extensive experiments on structure cooling and as well as shading buildings with the materials and complexity. And those learnings also come into our practice in small buildings. As far as vendors are concerned, we recently worked with Economy, which is an Italian company which works in India, and they have been we use the components that they provide. They have an efficient system of putting things together. That we use what we want. We do not get, we don't use everything that comes.
Yeah. Well, with this, I'll take the last question.
One point.
Sure.
So, typically, in such the Adipur house, have recorded temperatures have not gone beyond 33 degrees Celsius in the peak of summer. I'm talking about surface temperature of the underbed plant. And incoming temperature was in the range of about 27 or 28 because it's a very deep and large gas. And it's covered in earth, so and it is also in a not in a very high methane area. So the space remains well below our human thermic comfort pressure.
Okay. Yes. So with that, we'll take our last question from architect Bijoy Ramchandran. Well, he says, thanks Uday for sharing your reticent and silent work. Like you described Professor Pereira's work, wonderful work. How do you work within the office between you and Mosami and with the team? Are these particular things you always consider to find the beginnings of things?
So this question has arisen several times. It arises regularly in the office. We have a it's a own recognition respect for each other. Between me and Mosami, of course, but also with everybody who connects with us. And while things are happening at the same time, we complement each other's ability. So if I have to talk to you about me and myself, we often think that we are in a Google Doc. And you know exactly when the other person brings and when we need to stop thinking, and there is a cycle of within a certain structure, there are two musicians at work. And we don't claim that we are as sort of sorted out as musicians are, but there is a struggle to kind of, be there. And I think there is a lot of sense that is essential in this, which is actually the backbone of our practice.
Yeah. Uday sir, this is really a great thing to hear from you. With against all the odds, your dedication can be literally been experienced right now, and I'm really overwhelmed by the way you actually work in the sustainable field. And with this, I have Girish sir who would like to have a conversation with you. Just hold on, sir.
We'll end it here. And I wish we all can listen to Pandit Jasraj Bhajans today night, who just passed away at the age of 90 in his memory. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, and
Yes. Thank you, Uday. Thank you.
And I'm so delighted to be able to sort of get pinned down and see the work of all our colleagues who are working those with their own fields. And I think it's a huge learning, and I'm sure the Coding fraternity is talking with both because in these times, I think there is a huge opportunity to sort of soak in and focus on the things that are happening around you through this medium. Unfortunately, I apologize for late in communication because we have some serious weather happening outside and the local electricity isn't turned off. So, thank you once again.
Yes. Well done. Yeah. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you all the participants for enjoying today, and join us tomorrow at the same time with a presentation by architect Virendra Vakhlu from Delhi. Thank you so much.
Oh.